continue the dialogue about token solutions on Bitcoin SV. Because Bitcoin SV is an emerging ecosystem, we have not coalesced yet around a single token protocol, standard, or solution, and there are many different views, options being developed, already released. So to discuss this, we're going to have James Belding join us, as well as a number of representatives from companies that are both having and creating token solutions and options for issuers. And I've also invited representatives from two companies who are the actual token issuers themselves so that they can describe for us what are some of the requirements that they have in their token needs. So let me introduce them all, and I'll have them all talk to you briefly. You met James Belding, the founder and CEO of Tokenized. We also have Jerry Chan, CEO of TAAL Distributed Information Technologies, joining us from London. With him is Steve Shatters, the Chief Technology Officer of Enchain, who you've met before. Also virtually is Ryan X. Charles, the founder of MoneyButton, but as we've learned this week in an announcement, now part of Bayesian Group and Fabric, which he'll discuss. And our two token issue representatives from Norway, Stephan Nilsson, the fishman himself, CEO and founder of UNISOT. And then also you met him yesterday, the founder and CEO of Transmira, Robert Rice, who's providing you all those fun AR experiences and BSV tokens in his app. Welcome all gentlemen. So let me ask each of you to just briefly introduce yourselves and what role you play in the token space. So let's start with Ryan, because you've got the big news of the week. People would not have associated MoneyButton with tokens, so please introduce yourself and what role you're going to be playing now in the token universe.
Sure. So I'm the founder and CEO of MoneyButton. MoneyButton is a widely used, essentially a non-custodial wallet for applications in the ecosystem. So we have many different apps that use MoneyButton as the wallet. I've been talking recently publicly about tokens without revealing the full depth of what we're really doing. We've now been acquired by Bayesian. So the Bayesian Group, operating through its brand Fabric, owns MoneyButton. And what we're doing is we're creating a tokenization platform. Our intention is actually to support all token protocols. We want to stay token sort of protocol independent as much as we can. And we really just want to enable the ecosystem to create and manage tokens.
Okay, great. Jerry from London, please tell us about what work TAAL is doing, because again, people know TAAL is blockchain transaction processing. Tell us about what it's doing in the token space.
Thanks, Jimmy. Yeah, I think a lot of people might be wondering why TAAL is involved with tokens in some way, and it all goes back to the fact that TAAL is we're striving to be the infrastructure, enterprise infrastructure, blockchain services provider, and we believe that the tokenization is a very, very large industry, and there are different layers of technology that needs to be deployed for tokenization. Most saliently, there is the enterprise or application layer, which I think James had a great presentation, talked about all the complexity and requirements at that level. But at TAAL, we're more concerned and more interested in the lower, so the infrastructure, the hardware protocol level. And in that sense, we have filed a patent on some L1 or L0, like very low level protocols, which could facilitate tokenization applications built on top of it, which hopefully will simplify things for enterprises and wallets, which may choose to use a standard low-level protocol as opposed to building everything full stack themselves. So that's where we're interested in tokenization.
Steve, what are Enchain's plans with regard to tokens?
Well, like a few other panelists here, we haven't really talked much about our interest, I suppose, in the token area so far. One of Enchain's core capabilities is low-level Bitcoin infrastructure. We deal with that kind of every day in terms of the Bitcoin SV node and a lot of other things that we do. So it makes sense for us to kind of leverage that core capability. And whilst TAAL is probably focused more on the boundary between hardware and software, we're focused more on the boundary between software and business logic. And so we have an interest in the token area as a capability provider to enable other people to build token solutions on top of it, whilst being able to simplify the process for them in terms of dealing with some of the complex Bitcoin stuff, as well as the kind of the scaling requirements. So we would anticipate ourselves potentially working with, almost every other token provider, because whilst we're not quite ready to reveal the extent of what our commercial offering is going to be, it's going to be something that that almost anyone in the token space would be able to make use of in the ecosystem.
Right. And in addition to the people represented on this panel, there are other token offerings out in the marketplace or being developed. For example, Run on Bitcoin, developed by Brenton Gunning, is one that's already been in use for a while. Actually, I invited Brenton to be here, and he wanted to focus on getting product out and launching Run. So we wish Brenton the best of luck and can't wait to dialogue with him on a future panel like this. But now let's turn to some of the token issuers on our panel. So Stephan, people have known you from your prior presentations about tracking halibut across the world on the UNISOT and Seafood Chain platforms. How are you involved with tokens?
Yeah, hi, thanks. So, there has been a lot of talk about tokens and things that it's not in Bitcoin SV, but I think as we hear here that there is a lot of tokens in the background. And what we have been doing from start is what we call a smart digital twin, which is an entity that we store in the blockchain where we can add data and where we can also change the ownership of that smart digital twin. So in practice, it is a token. This is a token protocol that we have built on top of the MetaNet. And since there were no specific standard when we started this, we decided to build it ourselves. So yeah, you could call us a token issuer, and yeah, technically that's right. But as in the whole supply chain industry and our customers, we are not selling blockchain or crypto or tokens. We are selling solutions to them. And to be able to trace merchandise or articles in a supply chain, we simply need this functionality, and it happens to be a token.
So Stephan's company is an example of one that uses a behind-the-scenes token in order to power its blockchain service. So Robert, please tell us how Transmira is using tokens, although people who are using your conference app are probably already seeing it.
Yeah, so that's all pretty basic. In the grander scheme of things, we're actually really early, and we're still trying to develop things out and kind of understand what that's even going to look like for what we're building. I mean, we're basically treating data and objects, real and physical together in a lot of new and different ways. And it's like some of the things are obvious, whether it's digital real estate or virtual goods. But there's other areas that we're still trying to figure things out as we go. And this is kind of one of the reasons why this conversation is going to be very interesting. When we start thinking about how do you manipulate data in 3D, how it interacts with itself or other objects, and then what are the privileges tied there? How do you associate value with it and make that transferable or not transferable, or how you even engage in commerce? On that consumer and user side of the fence with, the tokens and things going on in the background that's not necessarily apparent to those users. It's pretty fertile, untapped ground.
Now I want to ask the panel to address kind of a question that's been going around, or topic that's hotly discussed on social media and online forums in the Bitcoin and Bitcoin SV world, which is, where are all the BSV tokens? And I think what we're learning is there have been a number of behind-the-scenes tokens, such as Stephan Nilsson's company. CryptoFights has been building, obviously, its own token. True Reviews uses its own token. And I think people are itching, though, for publicly traded exchange tokens. There's actually been one before, Zwei Space, which is a company out of Japan, actually released a Zwei coin token on the Binance exchange in Australia. It's just a little bit less known. That happened quite some time ago. And then last week, or in the past week, Jack Liu's RelayX launched the first stable coin on Bitcoin SV, which is a wrapped USDC coin that's wrapped in BSV. And so that's caught a lot of attention, and it's raised this big question: what's taken so long to get these tokens to the market? James, you want to address that?
So We always looked at the problem very independently. We sort of looked at what we saw the opportunities were, and we weren't too focused on the activities of the spaces. So we sort of have analyzed the smart contracts part of the solution to be really the most compelling component. That's something that's going to change human behavior. That's going to get real adoption from mainstream users. We're not totally convinced that a lot of the tokens that are traded on Ethereum are anything other than a toy for the most part, or a speculative, scammy type situation, financial instrument that's got lots of dodginess behind it, and is more of a symptom of the reality of the time and the lack of clarity around what things were and the hype and all that. So we don't see it as a bad thing. Like, we think that BSV has got our foundations down correctly, and we're the only platform that can scale. And then with that foundation, we've always been looking to build things of real value. And the value that a token provides it doesn't add financial value. It doesn't add value in the underlying asset. It only adds value or utility to the process of ownership, the process of administering the contracts and issuing it and trading it over time. But we think that most of the value is very much in the smart contract side of things rather than just the token itself. And as a result, we personally haven't been focused on it too much. I also think there's an element of Ethereum sort of thinking that they had their foundation correct many, many years ago, and then the flurry of builders working off that faulty foundation to build what they had now and put a lot of time and energy into it. So in that way, they're just a lot further ahead in terms of building. The BSV community has really only been starting to build businesses and infrastructure and stuff really effectively, and only could do so, fairly recently, within the last year or really two. So I think there's just that element as well.
All right, let's take a quick moment to talk about the new USDC token from RelayX. What do we think about it? What's your reaction? Steve, I know you tweeted about it. What's your reaction to the release?
I haven't had a chance to look into the technicals of how it works, but I mean, it's somebody who's bringing something new to Bitcoin SV. It's openly traded on a market, so that's the kind of product that I like to be able to evaluate, because I can take the lazy option and let the market do it for me. I think time will tell if it gains adoption. Yeah.
Okay, great. So now let's talk about the different approaches people have to tokens, and then we'll get to some of the other panelists about what the requirements are. We've heard from James Belding present, including a demo of his platform, which will be coming out. Let's start with TAAL. How is your approach to a token solution different than what we've heard from James or what we've seen from Run on Bitcoin?
The difference fundamentally is the way we see token solutions, we're not seeing it as the direct business application. That's not the business TAAL is in. We are seeing token standard as very much analogous to, say, HTML or JSON is to as a method of communication that goes over the internet. And if we were to use the analogy that Bitcoin is like the internet, then I'd like to say our token solution is like JSON. Anybody can use it. And it's not tied to a specific business application. And so our goal is to make this standard so that other companies, other issuers, or other middleware provider or validators can come in and use that as the backend and build their token solution, such as Tokenized or perhaps Fabrique or others like that, because those are the actual business level tokens. And we don't want to approach the business level side because, as James aptly stated, it's really complex, and different token solutions for different business use cases are vastly different. But we believe that they can all be boiled down into one simple, almost bare metal layer protocol, which simply is, we need to be able to track balances. We need to be able to have a provable and transparent and public on a public blockchain way, where any token can be traced back to its issuer, and that issuer needs to be represented by a public key. So it goes back to very similar security model as Bitcoin itself, which is you can trace back every Satoshi to its Coinbase, where the block was mined. And with the token platform that we're developing in conjunction with some developers and partners, it's very similar. It's the ability for you to trace back any token to its issuance transaction, and that standard need not be, that feature need not be done by Bitcoin miners. It can be, but it could be done by specific purpose companies or validators or folks in the economy who might make a business out of providing this sort of traceability. But coming up with a standard is where we're mostly interested in.
Ryan, let's turn to you and hear about what Fabric's approach to offering a token solution or platform is going to be.
Sure, let me answer that. I want to come back to something you brought up earlier, though, and I'll come back to Fabric in a second. I want to address your question about moving slowly. I don't think we're moving slowly at all. I think we're moving extremely quickly. What we've actually seen is in the rest of the cryptocurrency industry, they're moving very quickly in the wrong direction. So they've created solutions that are entirely unscalable, for one. So everything on Ethereum is unscalable. The other problem is that most of them are actually illegal. So I think if you constrain the problem to let's solve this for real, we're actually moving very quickly. I think Tokenized is moving very quickly. I think the other project I've seen are moving very quickly. I think we're moving very quickly. Our approach is different than the other ones in that we're not so much involved in the protocol itself. So what we would like to see is something like, let's say Tokenized develops an ecosystem around their protocol. We will support their protocol. We'll support all of them that have ecosystem adoption. We can help sort of bootstrap that a little bit. So we want to get people creating tokens, managing tokens, sending tokens, using tokens, et cetera. But we're only ever going to do it in a way that actually works technically in a scalable way, something that we know is going to work now so that when people actually start using it, it doesn't break. We're also going to do it in a legal way. So if the tokens have no value, you can eliminate some of the requirements around sort of KYC compliance and things like this, but that's only if they have no value. So how do we create real financial assets on chain? We're going to do it in a completely legal and compliant way, and we're not going to cut any corners in that respect, so that when we actually do this, it's for real. Our competitors are NASDAQ, not Ethereum.
Yeah. Ryan, what's the timeline that we can all expect for the Fabric token platform?
Interesting question. So we have Fabric is live right now. You can join it. You can create tokens and send tokens around right now. So the timeline is today. The other questions are more like, what is the timeline to real world financial assets? I would say as fast as we can solve all the legal issues. That's more of a legal thing than a technical thing. So you can actually join Fabric, create tokens today.
Great. Steve, tell us what it will be nChain's approach to offering a token platform or solution to the best extent you're willing to discuss it right now.
I think it's probably important to put it into context in that anything that involves tokens is there for us in order to be able to complete a full kind of integration picture. When you talk about being able to kind of transfer any set of business logic onto a blockchain, there's a whole bunch of services that might be related to audit and various other things that are going to be part of that total solution, and very often a token is a part of it. Our approach to this, as I say, is to provide building blocks rather than full solutions to enable people to put components together in order to build the solution that they need. But very much with a focus on you don't need to worry about whether this is going to scale or not, because we will handle all of that for you kind of in the back end. But I think it's interesting to pause and consider some of the drivers of I guess token adoption on BSV, because we do talk to a lot of people in the back end of nChain, and we don't publicize most of those conversations. But we've talked to quite a few people who've come from an Ethereum background, or they've actually got an existing thing on Ethereum, and they come and talk to us for one of two reasons, and quite often for both of those reasons. One is because they know that Ethereum can't scale, and they're talking about BSV, talking to BSV companies to see if they can get some of that scaling magic. And a lot of those, after the initial kind of discussions, realize that a lot of solutions on BSV involve an issuer. It's not all validated by miners, etc. But a lot of them actually go, well, that's actually a great thing, because that leads to the other reason, is they want it to be legal. Most of them actually understand what a legal hole they've gotten themselves into with some of the the implementations that they've attempted on BSV, and they actually want to move down the road of getting compliant. And so moving to BSV-oriented solutions is very attractive to them for that reason. And if you put those two together and delete the 95 or whatever it is % of Ethereum-based tokens that don't actually have real business models, you've actually got quite a significant market there ready-made already.
Okay. Now let's turn to the other companies and talk about what are the types of requirements you are needing when you're creating tokens or have created tokens. We'll start with Stephan. What is it that you needed when you built your digital twin, essentially, token, and what will you be needing in the future from a business and technical perspective?
Yeah, since we are providing services for enterprises, it's what I'm always talking about. It has to be secure, it has to be scalable, it has to be cost efficient, and it also has to be stable. And that's the main things that we need for everything we are building in an enterprise application. And the same thing with the tokens. So, and of course, as mentioned here, they have to be legal as well. So, because when we do any services to enterprises, let's say we get one big, if we integrate with one big multinational company, they will create millions of transactions, and that's where we need the scalability. And because they're making all of these transactions, it also has to be cost efficient. And that's why we are using the Bitcoin SV blockchain, because that's the only place where we actually can get this functionality.
Robert, I remember talking to you months ago when you were starting your company's journey to create a BSV-based token. So why don't you walk the audience through what you were thinking at the time in terms of what you needed, and then what you've learned along the journey about what you will need going forward?
Oh, for sure. So in short, I can echo the other comments. It has to be fast, has to be very scalable. What we're trying to do is at a very large scale, and very user-driven. So those are, two of the big driving factors, and certainly why we wanted to, be part of the BSV community. But also that, one of the things that we certainly realized early on, because we are not, Bitcoin or blockchain experts, was finding the right partners and the right, technical platforms that could provide the support, could provide guidance, can kind of, make it easy to onboard us and get us going quickly, and as well as looking forward to the future. Again, we're getting into uncharted territory with some of the tech that we're building and how we're dealing with the world and data. So being able to kind of have those right partners and have that technical support and guidance as we go along the journey, and expand and extend and evolve, I think was critically important for us, and we don't necessarily see that in other protocols or industries, or whatever. So now it's pretty exciting to see a lot of this coming together very quickly. Certainly, I don't think we're going too fast or too slow. I think it's good to take a moderated pace and do it right. I think the rest of the industry will certainly follow up. And when you look at other companies like me that are like, hey, we're building this cool, product or platform, it needs to be on chain, it needs to be tokenized, or whatever. Having a way to kind of get in early and get in quick, good documentation and support, again, I think those are critical, especially at the enterprise level, where these guys are big and slow, and they may not necessarily have the skills or talents to know what they're doing, and they tend to go with the flow, which is why we still see a lot of Ethereum or whatever based things. So I think the community and the support are really critical, as well as all the technical aspects.
Yeah, good support, good documentation, critical. Now I want to focus on a issue which causes, discussion, debate in the Bitcoin community, which is the difference between UTXO-based layer 1 versus layer 2, or perhaps, as Jerry mentioned, layer 0 solutions for tokens. So I'll turn it to some of the other panelists. Do you have thoughts on which is the best way, or are there multiple best ways? James.
So There's a lot of really great designs out there. So I'm very respectful of the work that's been done by a lot of the contributors in the token protocols. Where it comes to commercial tokens that have commercial value, financial instruments, utility tokens that are largely commercially focused, the coupons, the loyalty points, the admission tickets, I do think we stand out. I think there's going to be a lot of value in what we do, particularly in that it's flexible enough for real business. So as time goes on, contracts need to be amended. And most importantly, contract-wide terms and conditions are typically important for most consumers. However, I do think that there are going to be some use cases that the other tokens take up and perhaps are just a bit simpler to execute on. But yeah, I think when it comes to the commercial records side of things, I think the tokenized protocol is the best. One thing to consider is when you do a layer 1 token or even a layer 0 token where you're largely relying on script, when you have big user bases of token holders, like this is, let's say, we think of a token that represents some type of share or financial instrument, and it's literally held by 1 million people out there, 1 million different entities own it. What happens if you want to upgrade that, if you feel like you've got a bug in it, or if you've got an issuer control token in that same circumstance where you've got a multi-sig signing arrangement that helps the issuer control and sort of whitelist the ownership of that so that they comply with law, they can be essentially a registered security. The problem with that is what happens if that key gets compromised, right? What if the director or a number of directors, they leave, they come and go? What if as business goes on, as time happens, the keys need to be swapped out? And the important thing is that in those examples, you have to basically reissue every single token. So that's a huge cost, but it's also a huge inconvenience, technically, administratively, customer experience wise. Whereas you can actually do a minor change, a single transaction with the tokenized protocol and effectively upgrade it. Not only upgrade it in terms of changing terms and conditions with perhaps permission from the other token holders, but also add features as time goes on, improve the value proposition of it. So it enables, another example I'll quickly touch upon is the idea of oracles and the ability to freeze and confiscate tokens. So in property rights, right, there's always disputes. People ultimately have to have property confiscated for them for various reasons, whether it's insolvency, whether it's a marriage breakdown. To do that can be very, very painful with a non-custodial private key option. There needs to be some method for these, the courts or what have you, to go in and actually basically confiscate them. Well, we propose a method that allows the private market, the private sector, to do that, to not only whitelist and attach KYC identities to that, but they can do that separately from the contract issuer themselves. So the contract issuer can not have to worry about that kind of side of things. And it also allows for these identity oracles and authority oracles are effectively providing regulated functions, so like similar to financial institutions, to fail and for new ones to start up and join the smart contract without interrupting service, and to do it for very, very low cost. So we think those are really, really profound and pivotal features that the other token solutions just don't have. And that's why I think that they just aren't as suitable in terms of efficiency, in terms of usability for the real business world.
Let's turn to Jerry from TAAL. I know, Jerry, you have an opinion about this question of what layer to do token solutions on, and importantly, whether the token should be validated on-chain or using systems which have servers, for example, on other layers. Tell us about your position.
Right. Well, first off, I'd like to, actually echo that. I do believe that most business level, like how users would interact with tokens, is effectively on layer 2, because that's where most of the complex business logic should probably lie. But in our perspective, it's not one layer is better than the other. It's kind of like one layer kind of needs to encapsulate the other. For instance, you could build complex logic in script, but as James said, it's probably we don't have a lot of expertise around the world to be able to do that. And you could build extendability and the ability to change contracts and change signatories and even upgrade them all on script, once again. But it is more complex. So, and layer 0 or layer 1 tokens, which is, I guess, no Bitcoin node validated, are more of the difference is sort of like using Bitcoin like a disk. So you could write whatever application and you use the disk as storage. That would be like L2. Whereas L1 is more like I said, like HTML or some sort of protocol where it doesn't give you all of these fancy bells and whistles features, which you probably need if you're building a real world security or bond or something like that. But it does give the base sort of file system that somebody who's operating, forgive the engineering analogy, but if you're operating in the operating system level, you talk to the file system manages where all the bits and bytes on your disk are stored. And you do need an operating system to basically intermediate to produce something which is usable for the user at the application level. And I believe that there is very much a need also for a low-level efficient file storage system, or in this case, a token, like a layer 0 or layer 1 at least, a file system, because at the end of the day, I think there are uses for token systems where the economy is small. And if the economy of all their users is small enough, then for sure, you can build your entire solution on L2, and that would be fine. But if you need to scale up to global levels, the only globally scalable technology we know of today is Bitcoin UTXOs, right? Any other way of trying to scale something up to that level, where you have billions or trillions of individual addressable units, you're always going to run into an indexing problem. You're always going to run into whatever server you're trying to run to maintain balances or to authenticate tokens is going to have to start keeping a very, very large database index of where all these tokens are and whether it's valid or not. And you either are signing up to solve all that problem yourself as an L2 solution, or you can just sort of offload it into L0, which doesn't have any complex business logic, but it will solve you that problem. It will just simply solve you the problem of you can trace back to the issuance transaction, and in the issuance transaction with an issuer approved by the public key, you can put whatever standard you want. It probably makes a lot of sense to come up with a data standard of what information you want to put into the issuance contract, like the legal entity name and address and a lot of other metadata. You can put all that into the issuance transaction, but the ability for wallets to always be able to find that issuance transaction without any sort of external software or anything proprietary at all, that's kind of where we see the value in an L null or L1 solution. Because then you're not really dependent as a business on any given solution provider or technology company or platform, because you're only dependent on the fact that Bitcoin UTXOs work. And I think that's the one thing we all know that does work, and it is scalable.
Let's turn to Steve for N-Chain. Steve, what's your position on the debate over layer implementation for tokens?
N-Chain's in kind of an unusual position in that we actually invented the fundamental technology behind L0 and L1 3-4 years ago, but we're actually choosing to focus more on L2. And it's for a few reasons, partly because it wasn't actually possible to do any of the L0, L1 stuff on Bitcoin until the Genesis upgrade restored some of the functionality of Bitcoin. But also because I guess our target market are the kind of people for whom that ability to control issuance and perform all of the functions that James was talking about before, that's kind of a critical requirement for them. And that's just easier to do using L2. I think L2 certainly can be scalable. We've got a roadmap for that. Bitcoin kind of shows us the way to solve those problems. And if miners are going to have to solve these problems themselves in order to kind of scale up. So miners can do that. And in the process, they'll probably be taking a lot of inspiration from the Googles and Facebooks of the world who've had to solve a lot of other scaling problems before we tried to do it in Bitcoin. Then I think L2 providers can probably do that. That's not to say that there's not a place for L0, L1. I think there probably is. It's early days at the moment. It's new technology and it's being explored at the moment by a few parties. Scrypt is involved in it. Stars and TAAL solution, they're working hard on it. So I'm glad that it actually is getting the proper exploration because Bitcoin Scrypt offers a world of possibilities. And again, I fall back to my default answer when I don't want to commit myself to a position and risk being wrong in the future, which is that the market will figure out where the best fit for these different technologies is.
Let's turn to Ryan. Ryan, I know Fabric's place in this ecosystem somewhat agnostic, obviously, to what layers are used for token implementations. I'm curious if you have a personal opinion on best approaches, and then also I think you'd be a perfect person to help explain to our general audience why this even matters. What's the difference between these different layer approaches?
Okay, sure. I have several things to say about that then. So first of all, thank you, Steve, and the team at InChain for making all of the options possible. So there are a lot of new things we can do thanks to Genesis. And Genesis was the original idea of Bitcoin. That is, basically, we have the full flexibility to use script now. So this really does open up entirely new categories of options. If we're going to let the market decide, the market should be able to decide amongst everything, and that includes these layer 0 protocols using Bitcoin script as essentially the well, let's call it a predicate underneath. What all this stuff means is, I mean, I'll explain my understanding of each sort of layer here. So in Jerry's terminology, layer null refers to the idea of actually using Satoshis themselves as the tokens. This is sort of the lowest layer in a sense, in that you're using literally Bitcoin itself as tokens. So it's sort of the most fundamental way to create tokens. Layer 0 refers to the idea of building more sophisticated token technology inside script. So this is sort of a layer above that in a sense. We call it layer 0 because it's using script inside Bitcoin. But it's more advanced, it's more complicated than using Satoshis themselves. Layer 2 refers to the idea of building a lot of technology outside the blockchain and then recording the stuff that you want on the blockchain. So we actually have a wide variety of options, everywhere from using Satoshis themselves, using script, using off-chain technologies, and writing stuff to the blockchain. With respect to the market, I mean, of course, the market will ultimately answer all these questions, but we are also market participants, and we have to make decisions about what we're actually building for our customers. So speaking as a business, what we're doing is, we don't yet know what is going to be the standard or the standard protocols. So we need to build everything in a protocol agnostic way right now. But ultimately, as market participants here, I mean, businesses will win or lose on the basis of whether you actually create value for your customers. So we need to be conscious of that. What I think we ought to do is recognize that protocols are different than businesses. Protocols are where we actually need to collaborate. I think that people have a peculiar view often that protocols are subject to competition like anything else. While that's true, it is not in any of our interests to have that type of competition going on. We can all compete with each other as businesses, but still collaborate on the protocols that require interoperability between our businesses. That's what I think we ought to do. Now, the Bitcoin Association has recently created the Technical Standards Committee, which is essentially responsible for governing a process that anyone can go through to create standards. What I think we should do is actually leverage that process to standardize the components of everything required to create tokens. We can make all of our businesses aligned on all of these issues. So we can find a way to merge tokenized, layer 0, layer null together in a holistic solution that allows businesses to pick and choose the different pieces of it as appropriate for their business, while fully retaining interoperability. So in a nutshell, it's great that we have the full suite of options available to us now. And again, thank you, Steve and team, for making sure that that's possible. And the layer 0 stuff is definitely going to be a part of this. But I definitely think we need to concentrate a little bit more on collaborating and not competing when it comes to the protocols, because we all benefit if we have standard solutions to these things, because the users will just be able to use all of our services, and we can compete as businesses rather than as protocols.
Let's turn to one of those businesses, Stephan from UNISOT. Hearing all this, does it matter to you whether token offerings for Bitcoin SV are on layer 0, 1, 2, 45? What is it that you want, and is this causing too much confusion for the business community?
No, I don't think so, because the business shouldn't care about this at all. It's up to us businesses who are making the services to the businesses. And I'm super excited about all this different level, 0, 1, 2 level of tokens, because it gives me more possibility to work with the system. We had to start before with our own layer 2 system with MetaNet, and that works really, really good. But we also see that there is a lot of other functions that we can do with the other layers, 1 or 2 or 0. Just thinking about stuff that we are looking into actually now is assets, and future trading for assets in the supply chain. There is a lot of very interesting things to do there. So I'm really excited on what's happening here. And as Ryan said, I think there is a very important task here for the Bitcoin Association and the standardization group to get some standards out there that we all can work together. And I really, really love the community for the cooperation that we do, because I think we have a very, very great community. I can reach out to more or less anyone, and we can discuss and we can do things together. But at the same time, maybe we are competing with some customers on another level. But it works really fantastic good here compared to any other community I've been active in.
That's good to hear. Now let's turn to Robert. Robert, I think you represent, the type of company who is new to Bitcoin, doesn't have a lot of prior Bitcoin experience, but wants to hopefully engage with Bitcoin SV and BSV-based tokens. Hearing all this, what advice do you have to the Bitcoin SV ecosystem and the companies on this panel about how to make things easier for companies like you to begin using Bitcoin SV tokens?
Well, first and foremost, it's a little intimidating seeing the evolution of the language as new technology is developing, and I certainly experience this on a daily basis. When I talk to people, I can throw 35 different acronyms at you that cover all kinds of different things, and most people look at me like I've got horns growing out of my head. So trying to simplify that a little bit, I think is super important. Certainly conferences like this where there's some discussion going on, there's really good use cases or good examples, and a business focus, I think really make it accessible and a lot easier for newer companies coming in and say, okay, wow, maybe this isn't as complicated as it sounds. I can get in there and I can do this. And then at the same time, from a technical perspective, seeing the complexity and the sophistication without being, overly entangled, I think is important, because that provides some sense of reassurance that there's real technology, it's really happening, there's a strong community, standards are being put in place. Those are things from a business perspective I look at, long term. Do I jump on this? Is it too new, too soon, too early, or is it maturing and developing? So I think, conferences like this that make it very engaging and accessible, certainly, webinars, documentation, onboarding simple projects, and even a really good infographic can make all the difference in terms of helping the non-technical executive or business person really understand how this works or how it will work for their company or their product or their technology.
One issue that's come up in online discussion is whether or not wallets in the Bitcoin SV space are integrating quickly enough with the different token protocol options. Anyone want to take a stab at commenting on that? Let's start with Jerry. I think you raised your hand.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think this is the reason why I raised my hand. Is I think this is one of the differentiating points about L0 and L2 tokens. And the fact that L0 is just UTXO tracking, then most wallets can implement it without asking for permission, right? You don't need any sort of special wallet logic to read and understand these tokens. And the benefit of these STAS tokens is that if the wallet doesn't understand it, you can't accidentally send this Satoshi and then break the token. Which was the problem a lot of the colored coin technologies of old BTC had, which was if the wallet didn't understand it, then you would violate the protocol and you would effectively invalidate the token, and then you would have this whole problem again. And so I think it's very important. Our perspective for layer 0 is to make it very simple for existing wallets to just implement it without even asking for permission. Now, the one thing which I wanted to point out is that once again, it's not which layer is better. Layer 0 technology could be used by a layer 2 solution, and in fact, that's our hope. because you could either build everything from the bottom layer all the way up to the top to L2, where you can build a business application, or maybe you just want to focus on building the business application and the token logic for that specific token economy, and you want to offload all of the stuff which is lower level. And that's our hope, is that different applications will pick and choose, and if they can just use the simple fact that you can rely on wallets not being very complicated. You probably have to run your own token validator, because as somebody, as an issuer of a token, you want to run that validator anyway, because miners won't necessarily, or they're not forced to, provide everybody with the ability to query whether a token is valid. That's up to a miner. It's up to a transaction processor. That being said, at TAAL, we intend to, but not all processors may opt to do that. But as an issuer, you would want to do that. So we are aiming to make this standard the most, I suppose, general, so that everybody can use it in their own way.
All right, let's turn to Ryan, because Ryan, you've obviously run a wallet company, right, and are still involved with wallets. So what's your thoughts on how soon or how long it should take for these wallet companies to start integrating token protocols and options?
Well, our vision from the very beginning has always been to make sure we get to real-world fiat currencies on-chain. So we need to make sure that people can send actual dollars, actual pounds, whatever their local fiat currency is, they ought to be able to use that on the internet. This requires that we have a scalable, compliant, token system. We need many fiat currencies on chain to be able to do this. As I said earlier, I think that people actually underestimate how quickly we're moving in this direction. All the infrastructure we built in our wallet, let's call it the Fabric wallet, what was formerly Money Button. The name Money Button will certainly still exist, but it will be what's powering the Fabric tokenization system. We're moving very, very quickly towards creating this ecosystem. So it's not about rushing out there and just launching something just because. We launch things all the time that iterate towards the real global scale solution here. There are many things that we can do along the way to facilitate this without, say, making a poor choice when it comes to the protocol itself or compliance. So, for instance, all the features we built with Money Button so far basically grow out the feature set of Bitcoin. So to give you an example, one of the things we're working on right now is essentially completing the infrastructure for full Bitcoin support. Doing it this way allows us to have the ability to create every single token protocol. So depending on other businesses doing whatever it is that they do, supply chain and creating the protocols themselves and so on, we can fit these pieces together very, very quickly. So that's what we're doing. I mean, I think that it is on the wallets to implement this stuff, but there's no point in rushing out there and implementing something that isn't actually going to work. What we should do is iterate day after day towards the full scope, the full vision here, which is putting the entire world financial system on chain. We have all the properties we want in the Bitcoin blockchain to be at scale. There's not going to be many of them. There's going to be one, because there's going to be one that actually works. In order to achieve the properties, things like immutability, auditability, transparency of the financial system, we need one giant global public blockchain. So if we iterate our way there, it doesn't just mean rushing out and implementing whatever token protocol somebody puts together. It's about doing this properly, and we're getting there very, very quickly.
James, you wanted to make a comment.
The complexity versus simplicity argument, I think I want to touch upon that. So sometimes great complexity is required to provide simplicity, if that makes sense. So a very sophisticated engineering tool can go a long way to making the customer experience much simpler and much better. And I think that's something that we really held at our core philosophy when we were designing it, and something that I think is going to ring true in the future when the ability to interoperate with these standards really starts to show when you've got a lot of features involved. So from a very basic point of view, you don't have to, with something like a tokenized protocol, you don't have to partake in all the different fields that are out there. If you're just looking to send and receive, it's very, very basic. There's two actions you got to deal with. There's not that many fields. It's largely about just recognizing UTXOs the same way you were and a bit of extra metadata. But when it comes to getting into more complicated functions, more complicated smart contract features like governance, things like that, those are inherently a complex function, but they provide the user with a lot of simplicity. And that's a real value proposition. But by codifying and standardizing this complexity, it allows everyone to do kind of like what Ryan's saying, get on the same page and build a solution that benefits their businesses because it benefits their customers. I think that's a really important point that we kind of, we haven't hammered home enough, let's just say, but I think it's going to ring true as time goes on. And I think that's the heart, again, wants to reemphasize that even Bitcoin itself, right? Bitcoin is an inherently more complex system than the financial system is of today. So like an e-money wallet today, like a Revolut and Neobank, the financial infrastructure, the messaging, the type of data structures that they're working with is a lot simpler. Like building a basic Bitcoin wallet is just a lot more complex. There's a lot more to it, but that's going to provide serious value to the end customer. So there's merit in doing it. And I think the same thing can apply to some of the arguments we make for tokenized.
Let's take a look at one of the audience questions that's come in, and I will help address this because it involves law, and as you all know, I'm a former lawyer. So when is this legal thing going to be completed, Jimmy? I love that they ask it to me. Is there a country whose legal blockchain initiative aligns to the vision of Bitcoin SV? So let me address that quickly, and then I'll get feedback from the panel. I think it's a bit of a misunderstanding of what I think the panelists mean in terms of making tokens legal or with their protocol or solution. None of the companies represented here, especially the ones that are offering a token protocol or platform, are responsible for making tokens legal on Bitcoin SV or anyone's token legal. I think what they're talking about is ensuring that the initial tokens, especially that emerge in Bitcoin SV, are as legally compliant as possible. And that means the token offerings are building functions into their systems that help compliance be made easier by the companies that are issuing the tokens. So for example, James Belding's companies has built in the ability to revoke and restrict tokens, which any corporate issuer is going to want. Your rewards points, tokenized corporate stock, those companies are going to want the ability to revoke, freeze, restrict those tokens in order to comply with various legal requirements in any jurisdiction. So I think they're talking about building functions in to enable legal compliance, as well as selecting good early partners. One thing I've been involved with is discussions with companies who want to create tokens. I know some of the companies on this panel have wanted to make sure that those first tokens that they will partner to create, if there is any potential legal issue, that's addressed and compliance is ensured by the token issuer before that gets done. So I think those are the things they're talking about, not that they're going to make the tokens legal themselves. Anyone on the panel want to address that general topic? Yes, Jerry?
That's a good question, and I'm going to give the answer from the L0 perspective, or the layer 0 perspective, and because the L2 perspective is 100% what you just said. But from the layer 0 perspective, the legal aspect, because we're also very cognizant, we don't want bad actors using this technology and issuing, tokens which represent illegal goods or whatever like that. But being L0, we don't want to take on also the responsibility for having to necessarily police the economy of tokens which may spring up. It's a protocol after all. Like, you can do whatever you want with the internet, whether it's good or bad stuff. But our strategy right now is because the blockchain is public, and because once you see token contracts and L0 start going out, it's not that much of a mental leap to just say copy, do some cutting and replacing, and then doing it yourself. So our strategy is to, by default, release all token code, template code, Bitcoin script code, under a evaluation non-commercial use license only. But we would selectively give open, freer licenses, commercializable licenses to, say, infrastructure providers like wallets and other validators which may pop up to sort of facilitate the ecosystem. And that's key because we believe that at the end of the day, it is the wallets and the issuers, the servers that the issuers run to run a token platform at L2, which may utilize L0. It's really up to them to do the enforcement. Exactly as James said, right? It's up to whoever the issuer is to freeze and do all that kind of stuff, or reissue, and in order for us to control who we give that to, we will just be selective about who we give the commercializable license to, so that if bad actors do just start using it, at least we can say, they're violating a license and they're not supposed to be using this technology at all. They're in violation of copyright, yada yada yada. So that's our perspective, and I think that's about the extent that we can go on the L0 level, which is basically give the L2 applications and wallets enough tools to be able to do the policing themselves and to make sure that the issuers and the users are doing it in a legal way.
All right, on that note, I think we're going to start wrapping up the session. And I think it is a good thing to see that there aren't a lot of toy tokens out on Bitcoin SV, especially on public exchanges being traded, because we have brought to the Bitcoin SV ecosystem and attract many businesses who want to act in a responsible way and be different than a lot of the rest of the digital currency world. I think tokens of real world assets, real valuable things will be coming. They're already coming, as we've seen with the launch of the Relay X USDC token, and I'm sure there'll be more to come as the tools become easier to use. With that, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to leave us a closing thought about where you want to see tokens go next with your company and across the broader Bitcoin SV ecosystem. Let's start with Robert.
Massive wide-scale user adoption.
Great. Stephan.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to see that we have now more or less come a complete circle because we are using the original Bitcoin, and just like a year ago or a half a year ago, when you mentioned Bitcoin to people, you often get this stamp on your head that it's just a crypto stuff, it's just a scam and so on. But I see now I get more and more a response back that people start to understand that it's actually an enterprise level blockchain. And I'm super glad for that. So yeah, adoption and more standards or early standards that we can start using together, all of us.
Steve Shatters.
I'd like to emphasize the point that Ryan made earlier about interoperability. It's so important, I think, for the token space. And I wrote somewhere recently that today's competitor is someone that you share a common idea with, and they might be tomorrow's partner. I think that this is a critical thing for the whole ecosystem to address in the next 6 months. And token standards don't need to mean that Run needs to change their data structures to mirror tokenized or vice versa, or find some kind of common middle ground. You know, ERC20 is actually a kind of an interesting example of this. It was designed for Ethereum, and it's a count-based model. Yet we know, because we've been asked whether to model how you would do it, that you can make a UTXO-based BSV token system ERC20 compliant if you need to. So I think there's room there for a kind of a middleware layer to allow all token solutions to have a degree of interoperability that is of their choosing.
Jerry, what's your position from TAAL's perspective?
Yeah, TAAL's perspective is to mirror Robert's, you know, massive global scale adoption. And our perspective is it's not a contest between which layer is better. I believe all layers are required. Our layer is particularly low level. It's not supposed to address specific business needs. We want others to use it and implement it if it makes their system more efficient. And at the end of the day, the reason why we're very excited about this and the reason why we got really interested in this as a transaction processor and infrastructure provider is the reason why it's called STAS. Well, actually, the original reason was because the inventor is called STAS. But I backronymed it to Substantiated Tokens from Actualizing Satoshis. And I think that's important because it really hopefully gives an idea of what we're trying to do, which is to take a regular unactualized generic Satoshi, a Bitcoin, and to turn it into something that means something more. And the reason why this is very interesting to us is because it gives a legitimate use case for Satoshis, besides just collecting them and using them to convey data around. It actually means that you could use a Satoshi not just as a data carrier, or like a Bitcoin as a disk, but you could use a Satoshi to mean a digital twin to a real world asset. And anything which drives more valid use cases, utility value for Satoshis, will eventually drive more transaction volume. And TAAL's entire business model is based on like exponential growth of transaction volume on Bitcoin. And so that's why we're very much interested in pushing anything which drives more transaction volume for legitimate uses, utilitarian uses.
James Belding.
Yeah, so I actually really agree with what Jerry had to say there. I think from our perspective, we've had a lot of conversations with people interested in issuing tokens for various interesting use cases over the years. And the conversation always leads to, great, we want to try it, we want to do this. And for us, it's been about getting an enterprise wallet with the right feature set in order to be able to allow them to do that. So that's what we've been laser focused on, is really just getting all the features that we need, making sure that it's proper financial infrastructure that boards can sign off on. They can understand that we have all the security things accounted for, the questions answered. And then really trying to drive utility, like connect up those buyers with the easiest, or those interested users with the most easy, user-friendly kind of thing that their lawyers can make sense of, that they can establish and understand the risks properly of, and that we can explain to the regulators so that those useful tokens, that utility can start to drive real demand. And I think us as wallets and as technical, engineers and what have you, trying to collaborate and come to standards is great. I do think that's a really important thing, and I'm going to be part of that conversation and help out as much as I can. But I think really what's going to happen here is whoever can capture real demand and start to generate real transaction volume is going to be the standard. That's the real goal. Is we just need to really be able to provide something of value to a customer, and that's the standard will follow, and other wallets start to follow that. So that's really what our main focus is. We don't want to get too distracted from that mission at the moment. And we're basically at the point now where our wallet is, not only we've got a good front end, but we've got a back end wallet that allows others to build their own front ends for it, for various different things. So if this is a financial service provider, if it's a sophisticated enterprise and they need to integrate the token solution with their ERP system or accounting system, we have all those tools. We have an API ready for them to use. And it's real infrastructure. We put a lot of effort into the KYC onboarding component, the integration with financial infrastructure today, like bank accounts and what have you. So you have on-ramps and off-ramps. All that stuff is beneath the surface when you look at our app, but it's there and it's critical, and it's the questions and requirements the customers we've spoken to have.
And a final word from Ryan Charles.
Sure. So what we're doing is completely compatible with all the above. So, I mean, we need to see mass consumer adoption. We need to see mass enterprise adoption. We need to see protocols that solve different use cases. We need to see the sophisticated interfaces that solve problems for businesses. What we're going to do is move forward with everything. I mean, we create a tokenization platform that allows people to create and manage tokens consistent with everybody else's software, everybody else's business. We're going to standardize things as needed. So a lot of these things, we're all going to win when we standardize things that are interoperable between different businesses. It can be something that's already won. So if somebody creates a protocol that gets this, that gets consumer adoption, that gets enterprise adoption, we'll adopt that protocol. So I think the answer is all the above. And the way I like to look at this, there's something that Dr. Craig Wright said a few years ago that's a way of characterizing essentially the goal here. If we bear in mind that our goal is 5 billion daily active users of Bitcoin, everything we're doing is on the same page here. We're all striving towards that ultimate goal. We're going to create something scalable, compliant. It's going to solve real problems for consumers and enterprise. And every single one of our businesses is going to win in that scenario.
The biggest sickness in healthcare isn't a disease. It's not a bacteria or a virus. It's the silence. See, the data we need to combat diseases, to stop suffering, it's not waiting to be uncovered. It's stuck behind closed doors in stubborn silos. The healthcare industry has the data to improve our lives in untold ways, but no one communicates. And in that silence, countless lives are lost. That's why at EHR Data, we're building the largest ever shared data set of human health. And it won't belong to a hospital, government, a corporation. It will belong to the rightful owner of your healthcare data, you. We're merging healthcare records with blockchain to finally put you in control. Because your data doesn't belong on private servers. It should be in your hands in service to your health. The greatest sickness may be silence, but the silence stops when you have a voice. EHR Data. Own your health.